This meeting is being recorded.
Yes. Welcome, everybody. It's so great to see so many folks here this evening. I think this is the best attended event we've had since COVID. This is wonderful, best attended in-person event. Before we get started with tonight's program, I want to talk about where we're going to be going in the next couple of months. On February 21st at 7 p.m., we're going to have a hybrid program and streaming on Zoom as well. And that is going to be the 2024 Piping Plover recap with Mary Birdsong, which is always a very popular program here. So again, that is next month, February 21st, 7 p.m. And then in March, Mark Lathaby, who is in the back there's Mark. Tonight we have live birds. Mark's going to be showing us some dead birds. Actually, that's not a very good sales pitch, is it? We have got a lot of fantastic bird specimens here. And Mark is going to walk us through these different bird specimens. This is going to be an in-person event only because we're going to get to walk in the basement and we're going to get to look at all the different bird specimens. And that is going to be on March 21st at 7 p.m. So that's our next couple of programs coming up. For those that are joining us online tonight, we want to hear your questions. And the best way for that to happen is that you can drop things into the chat. So as Madison is making her presentation this evening, feel free to add any questions or thoughts to the chat. And then when we get to the Q&A session, following the presentation, Sue is going to read out your questions. So please feel free. For folks in the audience here, you're going to be able to ask questions. Madison is going to, sort of enunciate the question here. Here is Madison. For the folks who are online so that they can hear. So, all right, I've already been invoking Madison's name here a couple of times. So let's go ahead and introduce her. Madison has worked around birds since 2014 and currently works as a wildlife rehabilitator assistant at Tamarack Wildlife Center. She attended undergrad at West Liberty University in their zoo science and applied conservation program. She has been an active member of the falconry community since early 2020 and is now a licensed falconer. Joining Madison this evening, we have her sponsor, Dawn DeCrease, who is a master falconer. How about that? Master falconer. And also joining us this evening is Alec Buzzard. Is that not a cool name for a bird-related person? And Alex is a second-year apprentice. And with that said, I am going to turn it over to Madison. So welcome, Madison. Thank you.
Draw some other attention and introduce the other folks on Alex's glove. We've got Petrie, the American kestrel, joining us tonight. And although she may look like a statue, the female peregrine falcon over there is named BB. But yeah, so thank you guys all for having us. We're excited to give you guys a rundown on what is falconry, a little bit of the history of the sport and where it came from, its history here in North America, and how tools and tricks from falconry have been used in conservation over the years. So at its most basic level, the definition of falconry is the taking of wild quarry in its natural state and habitat by means of a trained raptor. Falconry is a hunting sport. You actually are required to have your hunting license to participate in the sport. So all three of us had to take our hunter safety course, learn all about guns and ammo to fly our birds. But it is a sport that is regulated on the state and federal level by here in Pennsylvania under the Pennsylvania Game Commission and under the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. One of the above. You guys have anything else you want to say? Or? Yeah. Yeah. So they're not working out that actually we'll go into that but a lot of people think, oh, yeah, so the basic overview of the sport is there's a whole lot that goes into actually getting your permits, but that's not what this presentation is about. So once you have your permits, you actually trap a passage bird from the wild. So this is a young raptor who mom and dad have already stopped feeding it. They've kicked him out of the nest. They're starting to push him out of their territory. But these birds have yet to leave for migration. Young raptors don't have the best success rates their first year of life, sometimes with a mortality rate upwards of 70%. By trapping a young first year bird out of the wild, we are actually going to help them through their first winter. Flying is instinctual, but hunting is not. It is a skill that young raptors have to learn and actually build upon. So at the end of the day, take the American kestrel, for example. They're hunting bugs, hunting lots of little insects. First frost comes, there's no more grasshoppers for them to hunt. So they have to learn how to switch over to voles. Some of them actually have to switch over to small birds like sparrows and starlings. If you're out on your own, that is a hard skill. If you miss a starling, you're going hungry for the rest of the day. Under the guidance of a falconer, once we've trained these birds to allow us to hunt with them, we are the dogs beating the brush, as Don was saying. We are the ones trying to get the game running for the birds. Once they catch it, if he were to miss, at the end of the day, he comes home to a full meal. We do this all throughout the winter, and then come springtime, we actually have the option to release these birds back to the wild as a healthier member of the breeding population. And then do the whole thing again in the late summer, early fall. Cool. So falconry is a extremely historical sport. It has been around for anywhere between 3,000 to 4,000 years, still up for debate. It is believed to have, earliest evidence is back in Syria, in the Middle East. Actually, in medieval Europe, it used to be a way to signify your social status. So where you fell in the world is actually what kind of bird you were allowed to fly. So kings and whatnot would fly gyrfalcons, which are the largest species of falcon in the world, right? Yeah. Whereas peasants and common folk were actually restricted to only flying the American kestrel. This historically was the way of putting food on your plate. So before the gun was invented, folks would fly raptors and train them to help them catch game like rabbits, duck, quail, pheasant, all depending on the type of bird you would fly. And then the gun was invented and falconry kind of fell out of style. There are many famous falconers that you might not realize. Shakespeare was a active falconer. Genghis Khan was actually an active falconer, and during the wars, they would actually take breaks to fly their falcons and hunt for food during the wars. Any other famous falconers you guys? Yeah.
Henry VIII. Was actually the Muse area. Muse is where you keep your record. This used to be toward Henry VIII. Like Genghis Khan, he had, when his armies were moving across Eastern Europe or through Asia and into Europe, they actually had thousands of birds along with all of his warriors and hundreds of falconers, and that was to keep his warriors from getting themselves into trouble when they weren't actually out fighting. So there was a lot that went into that, and I believe
Nice. Alex, do you know any other famous falconers? So, but when it comes to falconry in North America, it is a much more recent history. There's really no evidence of it prior to the 1930s. Even then, it started mostly among younger academic men. So it actually started more as a keeping birds as opposed to a hunting of the birds. They learned all this from old texts from Europe. This was among a lot of your Ivy League schools, academic fellows. But in 1961, the North American Falconers Association was established. And that's when it really became established as a hunting sport. So this association helps write the regs, enforce them, all that fun stuff.
they also help if there's any questions of whether something is legal or not. A lot of times the feds actually come and talk to them about what's going on. They also, if there's any legal problems, whether it be for birds or anything like that. There's lawyers. There's also veterinarians that work with NASA to actually help with if there's issues with birds. Like right now, like I don't know if everybody here knows about avian influenza going on. Well, for falconers that hunt birds and ducks, you know, there's worries about that sort of thing. So there's these guys are helping to work with the falconers, also with the biologists, to see what we can do to deal with that.
Oh, goodness. Sorry. You get to hang out closer to me now.
Oh, yes.
But yeah, so, and then in the 1960s, I'm sure many of you folks may remember what else was going on in the 60s was the decline of the peregrine falcon. So falcons were actually among the first group to notice the population decline in peregrine falcons. Because as we have said, falconers go out, we trap young birds that have already left their parents and are getting ready for migration. Peregrine falcons, like BB over there, were a popular bird to fly on ducks, pheasant, and stuff like that. But many DDT was actually the cause for the decline in the thinning of their eggshells. And actually a lot of the lead scientists that were pushing for conservation efforts within peregrine conservation were falconers. One of them being Professor Tom Cade at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. He was a falconer, a very avid falconer at the time. He was the director of research at Cornell's University's Lab of Ornithology. Oh,
Excuse me for this interruption. Why don't we try
let's go,
resharing.
Master.
Yeah, let's stop the share and then we're going to reshare again. All right. I apologize.
I just tell you where it's here, that's probably not whether he's a man or he's a female. How do you know?
I don't know. I don't.
Can you ask? So if folks that are online, if you could type in the chat if you're seeing slides advanced right now or not. Okay, perfect. Good. All right. Yes, no. Which slide were you on?
Are they same spot?
All right. All right.
No, okay.
Oh, yeah. He sits there and looks pretty. No, they're doing the majority of the hunting for the young and mom watches incubating.
Okay.
Back to it. Oh, do you know any more about Tom Cade and originally a Cornell and the beginning of noticing peregrine decline?
So they noticed the peregrine decline. It went from, I think there were over 5,000 breeding pairs in the US previous to DDT. And about the time they realized what was going on in 1965, they were down to something like 600, and then it was down from there to, I think on the East Coast, there was only 38 breeding pairs by the when they actually stopped the DDT, they said we need to do something.
Yeah, I do. So going forward. So folks would actually donate money to Cornell Lab of Ornithology, just addressing it for, donating this towards peregrine research. And Tom Cade actually opened a bank account informally at the time, and it became the Peregrine Fund. So the Peregrine Fund was formed for the purpose in the 60s of
reestablishing breeding population of the peregrine falcons. So it became official. They debuted in 1970s with the purpose of falconers banding together and initiating captive breeding programs for peregrine falcons. Anything else about the beginning of it, or?
Yeah, it was really between Kay, who was actually a falconer and a biologist, Cornell University, and the falconry community saying, we can't lose this species. And there were many falconers who donated their birds to the breeding project at Cornell, to start things up.
You were around for most of it. I was not. So that's why I keep asking.
I was not.
Oh, no,
I have no concept of time. Look at me, I'm like 12. But during these breeding pairs, to keep these birds wild and get them ready to go back to the wild, when they were those itty bitty little babies, they were either reared by their parent birds, or if they were hand reared by people, it was done with a puppet in a way to keep the birds wild. When the birds were a little bit older, they built what are called hacking towers. So got that big old wooden tower over there. At the top is a larger enclosure that has some windows, but the birds cannot leave that box. So these young birds, here's a picture of some young peregrine falcons in a hack tower. They get to see all the sights and sounds around them. People are still delivering food to them, but it's through either a feeding chute or like a little back door. So the birds never make the connection that humans are bringing them the food. Here are some closer pictures of during an Aplomado falcon breeding program. These are fledgling Aplomado falcons inside of a hack box. So you see they have access to food, they've got water up there, they have different perches. It's a large enough space for all these fledglings to move around, start stretching their wings. But you can see the barred window that allows them to get used to the sights, sounds, weather fluctuations that come with being in the wild. These hack towers are usually in fairly remote areas that are good habitat. So this is down in Texas, once again for the Aplomado falcons. And then here's actually a photo of after the hack box has been opened. The young birds are now allowed to leave, come back, and people will keep supplying food to them until they stop returning. Falconers originally did this for their birds to allow young goshawks, Cooper's hawks, stuff like that to build muscle mass before they were pulled for the sport of falconry. So this technique has now been used in countless reintroduction programs to reintroduce birds back out to the wild that have been captively bred. The Peregrine Fund now does a lot of other captive breeding projects. Because of the success of the peregrine breeding program, they are able to take the skills and tips and tricks they've learned and apply it to other species, even in different countries. So here in North America, they sponsor a lot of American kestrel nest box programs because American kestrels, like the Petrie here, are a species in decline. Mostly it's thought due to pesticide use that's decreasing the bug population and habitat loss. Like we said, helping with Aplomado falcons down in the southwest portion of the country. Out in California, the Peregrine Fund has been helping California condors, and up north with breeding programs for gyr-falcons. They also help sponsor conservation programs with different African and Asian species of raptors. Vultures are extremely in decline over in Africa and Asia. Andean condors down in South America, as well as lots of work with harpy eagle reintroduction and breeding programs and orange-breasted falcons. So not only was this used on a national level, this has also been used here in our home state of Pennsylvania. Back in 1983, the Pennsylvania Game Commission noticed that we did not have a lot of nesting bald eagles throughout the state. So they actually they built 3 hack towers in the state, 2 over in eastern side of the state and 1 in central PA. 83-ish nestling eagles were brought down from Saskatchewan and raised in these hack towers throughout the state of Pennsylvania. So that way when they fledged the nest, they would return to PA, and that is actually where the majority of our breeding population of eagles comes from. These are the best pictures that the Game Commission actually has on their website regarding them. Sorry, they're a little blurry, but you can see an example of one of the hack towers out in the wide open up on a hillside. So that way the eagles have room to take off and actually fledge as if they were leaving their nests. If you can make out the little black blurry blobs in that top right-hand corner, those are nestling eagles. And here they are down in the bottom, a little bit more grown up, getting ready to fledge. Anything else about hack towers and whatnot? We're gonna switch gears into the other. So not only can falconry help by doing hack towers and whatnot, falconers can also help give rehabilitated raptors a second chance at life. So a lot of these birds come into wildlife rehabilitation after being hit by a car, fell from the nest in a big storm. There's a lot of different issues that they may encounter. If a bird did not have enough time, say it was a young bird that missed that cutoff to learn how to hunt in the wild before winter came, these birds can potentially be placed with a licensed falconer to have a season or two under their belt of learning how to hunt in the wild. So all the way over there on the left, if you're looking at it, is a young Swainson's hawk who has a couple pellets from being shot in her chest. She is currently being flown by a falconer and is doing great, getting on game, but she missed that cutoff for being released into the wild before winter started. In the middle is a young Cooper's hawk who was actually found as a young little nestling whose tree was cut down. She was flown as a falconry bird for 3 years, and according to her falconer, has been returning to the same nest for the past 3 years, nesting and raising chicks now. And then this bird over here is actually being flown by Don's husband. This red-tailed hawk was hit by a car, suffered a severe concussion. So it's relearning how to hunt and whatnot under the guidance of Dawn. Got a couple different,
Just going into a couple case studies. So with peregrine falcons in rehabilitation, these guys are aerial pursuit predators that need to be in top condition for flight. A lot of times you cannot recreate that in human care. You can give them the biggest flight space you want. It does not mimic diving at a pigeon for 200 miles an hour. So by flying these birds with falconers, it's a great way to naturally recondition their muscles and get those hunting skills back. This is a young bird who was flown for a season under a falconer and was actually released.
This was on the left was when the Cooper's hawk was still in rehab. She was found as a young bird that tested positive for West Nile virus, which can cause lasting feather damage. So that's why a lot of her feathers are broken off. When they were growing in, they grew in extremely brittle or in the wrong direction. This bird was placed with a falconer, and after a year later, she was able to molt out all her feathers. You can see in this lower picture, that's a year later where her feathers grew in healthy and a lot better. We've got another case of a young Swainson's hawk who had actually fractured her wing after being hit by a car. After being flown under a falconer for about a year and a half, able to recondition all her muscles, get that wing strength back, and was released. You can see up in that upper picture, you see the box, that's a lure puller machine. So there's a string attached to a fake piece of fur. That is a great way to do physical therapy on these birds, trying to get them to fly longer distances and rebuilding those flight muscles as if they were chasing game. This here is a young goshawk that was admitted to a rehab center out west. The nest had come down. It was a nest being monitored by the DNR at the time. It was the only nestling found alive after the nest collapsed and sustained a small wing fracture that you can very slightly see on that bottom left-hand picture. But it is currently being flown by a falconer, and she said it is doing amazing and catching game. This is something that would not be able to be recreated in captivity. Golden eagles are also used for the sport of falconry, but they're kind of a special condition. People cannot not any falconer can go out and trap a golden eagle. They either are partnered with a depredation permit. So if a farmer is having issues with a certain golden eagle taking livestock, a falconer can be put in to potentially trap that bird and work it for falconry, or they can help rehabilitated golden eagles that need that large space pursuing prey out in the desert to recondition their flight muscles. So this is a young golden eagle who was flown for a year under a falconry permit and ended up being released after it was able to get the muscle strength back. Any notes about raptors and rehab or sick? And then it was a quicker presentation than expected, but I figured we might have a lot of questions afterwards, so it gives us plenty of time for questions. Ways that you can help support raptor conservation. You can build raptor nest boxes. A lot of species of birds of prey will readily use man-made structures. Barn owls, screech owls, American kestrels. All that information is on the Pennsylvania Game Commission's website. They have plans and what size you should make the entrance holes, so that way other species don't use it. Boise State University out in Idaho, they actually have a program where you can adopt and sponsor a nest box out there. You can support different conservation efforts, whether through donating or volunteering. Hawk watches are a big thing that help monitor for raptor populations. So Hawkwatch International, the Peregrine Fund, there's a handful of other ones as well. And then, like we were saying, with American kestrels being such bug hunters, a great way to help any of your native birds is decreasing personal pesticide use. Bugs are an extremely important part of the. He's got big feelings about bugs. Bugs are a really important part of the ecosystem, and they are also in decline, and that is causing a bit of a collapse for a lot of different species. Questions? Yes. Mhm.
Remember you.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah, so someone in the audience was asking about there's someone in their neighborhood that uses pesticides, even though there are a lot of birds and a hawk in the neighborhood. So we're trying to figure out what to do to help. At that point, it really comes down to
I think it really actually comes down to the people and educating the people
Yeah.
about it. But there are so many people that want green lawns, that it's really hard to deal with that. The good news is it's probably like a red shoulder or a Cooper's hawk that you have. The red shoulders are chasing all the chipmunks, and the squirrels, and they've really learned how to urbanize with us. So it's not quite so bad for them. Whereas the kestrels are more out in open plains areas. They're in open fields. And that comes down to farmers not using as much pesticide. It's hard. It's really ingrained in the US perspective to actually use this stuff. And we're trying slowly to educate people about it.
Yeah. Yes.
Trap the different species of raptors.
So we use a. Oh, yes, I'm so sorry. Another person was asking, how do we actually trap the raptors for falconry? There's a couple different techniques. The most common is using a small metal cage that can hold a bait animal, whether it's a mouse, gerbil, sparrow. It keeps the bait animal itself protected, but then there are a lot of fishing line nooses tied around. So that way, when the falconer is out trapping, say you see a red-tailed hawk on a power line, a licensed falconer can drive by, put the trap out, and see if monitoring the whole time to see if the bird comes down and gets stuck on the trap. Another trapping method, especially that's popular here in Pennsylvania, is ridge trapping. So you can also trap a bird on a ridge that is that's flying, typically southeast or southwest. So there are certain periods of trapping when we trap. We're typically trapping between September, October, those months. Some people trap earlier, some people trap later. Sometimes it's personal preference as to when that happens. So ridge trapping is also an option. That involves a giant bow net, and also bait birds to bring the bird in. But they're coming in from obviously a much larger, longer distance than if you are road trapping with a trap such as the ball chatry trap that Madison just mentioned. Yeah, so someone was asking, why does the bird come back to us instead of just flying off? Like I said, we're a guaranteed source of food. So over a couple weeks to a month's time, we teach the raptor that we are not trying to eat them and make them food, and we're not trying to take their food away. It's a slower process of showing them that we are actually the ones giving them food. Like Don was saying earlier, they don't come back because they love us or want to hang out with us. They come back because of that food and trust relationship and knowing that at the end of the day, we're a guaranteed source of food for them. But
You get this bird, and then what you're gonna hunt with it, what you're gonna have to do to get it to the point where you're hunting it.
repeat the question.
Okay. Someone asked about actually training birds to get them to work with us. Like we were saying, they don't love us. The only reason they're working for us is because of the food. So we start getting them used to, at first, we are big, scary predators. We get them used to standing on the glove and eating off the glove. Once the bird's standing on the glove and eating off the glove, then we ask them to jump for food. All this time, we are monitoring their weight. I want my bird physically fit. I want them to be an athlete, and I want them to hunt for me, but I don't want them too hungry. So I want them to be able to learn as we go along. So after they're jumping to us, we take them out on a long string and ask them to fly to us. And all the time we're monitoring their weight. Once that bird's coming 50 yards to us on a string, we've got a fair idea of where that bird's flying weight is. Biggest leap of faith any falconers had to take is take a bird you know doesn't love you, is only coming back to you for food, and hope everything you've done has worked. It's the biggest leap of faith any of us have ever had to take. Once that bird's coming like that, then we can start into the hunting. We start asking that bird if it's a kestrel or if it's a red tail, which we'll take out in a few minutes. Those guys we teach to follow us. We become the beagles. We're the ones who are beating the brush trying to get game to run for them. Once that bird, it clicks in that bird's head, hey, if I follow this silly human being who's thrashing around in the brush, it makes it that much easier for me to hunt. And that's between, hey, if I follow this human being, I get food. Hey, if I follow this human being, I get to kill something. And it all clicks with that bird. And then you can actually start hunting with the bird. When it comes to the falcon, there's a lot more to it. To get them, falcons hunt from about between 500 and 1,000 feet above their prey. So she's not mine. I'm babysitting for the falcon. So I have kindly watched her owner train her to a kite, put the kite up, and put food on her favorite toy on the kite and send it up. I guess apparently now they're doing drones, but I got to watch her owner run up and down a big field trying to get a kite to fly, get it up, and then let her go to get her to go up. Once she caught whatever it was up there and came down with it, she learned hanging out with him would work. And he started flushing ducks and pheasant and stuff for her. And she was like, oh, hey, this makes life easier. So that works with the birds. However, if you take a bird and you feed it up, you let it get fat and sassy, eat as much as it wants, and then cut it loose, it's not attached to us. It's probably going to go out there and do its own thing out in the wild without too much of a problem. Yes.
Let's start ties to that. Some of the raptors are out in the wild. What is it that attracts them to prey? Is it the scent? Is it the sight? Is it the smell?
I can go for it.
Sound possible?
So the question is, what attracts raptors to their prey? Birds of prey can see so much better than we can. They can see them.
Mostly based on sight?
It's mostly based on sight.
Okay.
Unless it's a vulture of some sort or a seabird, these guys don't have a very good sense of smell. So it's all about sight. They can see a mouse moving at a quarter mile. There was a study done on kestrels, that kestrels are actually seeing in ultraviolet along with the color scheme that we're seeing in. I'm not sure if it's been debunked or not, but they're actually following urine trails from the voles. They can see that, and they know that a vole will pee on its way out from wherever it's going because it doesn't have good eyesight. So it's going to follow the smell of its pee back again. And there was some poor master's student or PhD student that figured out that the kestrels could probably also see the urine trail and know where the voles were. So it's really about sight.
Yes.
It's actually, it's quite, the comment was that he was actually seeing someone running falcons and bird dogs together. I actually have a Harris hawk at home and I hunt him with a beagle. And he knows the beagle's a whole lot better at this than I am. So I just follow the whole party that goes that way. When it comes to falcons, they will fly about 1,000 feet above your head, waiting for you to flush something. They also learn to read the dog. The dog goes on point, and all of a sudden that bird comes from wherever it is over here, and it's straight over your head, waiting for that dog to flush it. It's really amazing to see them actually work as a team. It can also be a circus, at some points, if not everybody's working together, it gets really ugly. But when it all works together, it's really cool to see. They do. They do. If they come in on the kill, the bird's not going to do anything really nasty, but they'll use their feet on them and they'll get a scratch on the nose and the dog's like, you know what, I'm good. Yes.
Yeah, so the question was, what are the most common species of bird used in falconry? So when you're an apprentice falconer during your first 2 years, when you're still learning under a sponsor, you can only fly either an American kestrel or a red-tailed hawk. Arguably, red tails are probably one of the most common birds used in falconry. And then peregrine falcons, Harris hawks, and goshawks tend to be pretty common. The nice part about Harris's hawks, they're more of a desert southwest species. They are the only raptors that hunt in packs like wolves. So they catch on pretty quickly to the whole team hunting thing because that is what they do naturally with other Harris hawks.
The American kestrel and red-tailed hawk are the two species that apprentice falconers in Pennsylvania can hunt. There are a few other states that do allow some others, so it's a state by state regulation. But the red-tailed hawk and kestrel are two really great species to start out with. I don't think that we have a lot of argument about that. They're native to our area, and native species are what apprentices are flying.
Yes.
When a Cooper's hawk is in my neighborhood, these birds fly away, maybe somebody's caught while flying, or they all hug the twig and the branch, so they don't move, they don't cause movement.
Yeah. The comment was about how when a Cooper's hawk flies by, a lot of the birds at the songbird feeder will either all bail ship or they'll hunker down actually against the tree and whatnot to try and blend in and stay still so the Cooper's hawk doesn't see them. Yes, in the black.
So when the hawk or your bird goes, you flush out or the dog flushes out the animal. Bird can gets it.
Yes.
And then so that it's being killed for you guys to go and get.
Yeah, so originally back before sorry, the question was when the bird makes a kill, what do we do with it? So back in the day, it was the way of putting food on the table. Modern day, a lot of falconers do still cook what they catch, but frequently it is actually processed and just fed back to the bird. So that way we don't have to buy rodents and mice and rats for them. It's a very skilled maneuver of a bait and switch. When you go in, you toss a piece of food or the falcon's lure off to the side to get them to step away from their kill, while you then take it and put it in the bag. So that way the bird doesn't think you're stealing their meal from them. That's what helps continue this relationship going. Anything else? Okay. Yeah.
But when they release the birds back into the wild, how does it know not to return?
Yeah, so like Dawn was saying, once these birds, oh, you want me to repeat it?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I didn't know if you wanted me to repeat it.
Yeah, all of them, yeah.
Yeah.
When they release the birds back into the wild, how does it know not to return?
Yeah, so these birds, the ones that we are releasing back into the wild are ones that were trapped from the wild in the first place. These are birds that were raised by their parents, learned how to be kestrels, peregrines, red-tailed hawks from other hawks and falcons. They are not raised by people. They don't think they are people. So after a few weeks of fattening them back up and stopping working with them, they very quickly return to their wild state and happily leave sometimes. So, yes, in the back. Yeah, so the question was, how long does it take to do the whole thing? How long it goes to each level? So in the beginning stages, it can take any number of years from finding out that falconry exists to actually becoming an apprentice. There's a lot of steps in between. One of the biggest steps is you have to find someone who's willing to sponsor you. So you're an apprentice for at least 2 years, then you're a general. You can advance to a general for 5 years, right? Yeah, general for 5. And then you can apply to become a master falconer after that. You can only be sponsored by someone who's a second year general or above. So that's the official timeline for the different licensing, but the step from actually becoming a falconer, it varies because finding a sponsor can take years, because you have to build that relationship with someone. It's asking a lot of someone to take you on for a sport like this.
In the state of Pennsylvania, also, there's just about a little over 200 licensed falconers in the entire state. So it's also really helpful to live somewhat close to someone. Sometimes it's been known to have a sponsor that's many hours away. It really depends, like Madison said, on that relationship between the apprentice and sponsor. And it's something that typically, you get to know someone and hunt with them many times before that relationship begins.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, yes.
Is there, like when the birds, the raptors, are just flying above, and their silhouette against the sky, is there something that can identify? You look up, they go, oh, I know that's a kestrel. I know that's a falcon. I know that's a vulture. Is there something that stands out, or is it unique to each one? You just have to learn it.
Yeah, so when it comes to that, it's just the question was identifying birds that are a little far away based on their silhouette that you can see in the sky. Your different groups of birds tend to have different wing shapes. So your red-tailed hawks and similar in that group are going to have broad, kind of rounded wings to them as they're soaring. Your falcons, so American kestrels and peregrines, they're going to have long pointed wings. And then to each group has their own shape. So you can usually narrow it down based on wing shape, how fast they're flying. Are they just soaring in circles, or are they doing rapid wing beats to get past you? So learning a bit about the species behavior as well as learning the wing shapes will help you narrow down most of the time. Yes. Yeah.
How the heck do they work for the people who have Canada? How they got there?
It is the hacking towers. How human friendly are the hacking towers to being able to work with them? A friend of mine worked on the Eagle Project's reintroduction in Massachusetts, and they're not real friendly to people. She spent a summer. If anybody's interested in reading about it, her book's called Eagle One. But you climb up a ladder into this tiny space in the back. It's kind of this little anteroom where you chuck food into the babies. If you need to change their water, you're doing that at night so that the babies don't realize that you're there. So there's a lot of stuff that's not, it's not. Yes. Yeah, exactly. It's not easy. A lot of them will use a backpack, put all the baby food in the backpack, or like the water. They've got a pulley system in the back to pull 5-gallon buckets, up for it. The good news is it's only a couple of weeks and those babies are ready to rock and roll. So
yes, up in the front. The question was, are there any species of birds that are better than others? The biggest thing is you want to fly a bird for the quarry that you have, the game that you're hunting. So like an American kestrel, a red-tailed hawk is going to be much better at hunting rabbits than an American kestrel. But a peregrine falcon is going to be much better at hunting ducks or pheasant than a red-tailed hawk. So it really comes down to what are you trying to hunt? They all have their specialties, and based on their natural life history, what are they best suited for?
So most of the question is if the bird gets quarry, how do we find them? I've got bells up there. The old way to do it is they wear bells, and most birds of prey kill with their feet. So you're gonna hear the bells. Then it moved on to radio telemetry. So now you're walking around with this big thing and you look like Marlon Perkins and you're doing the beep beep thing. And half this room doesn't know who Marlon Perkins is, so I'm just gonna stop. Oh my God. I'm old. Uh, so you're running around and you're looking like you're looking for aliens and listening for a beep. And the newest thing, which is still pretty expensive, is GPS. The good that knew what I was up to. I usually did not carry my transmitter or my receiver for the transmitters. And she would pull her pheasant in undercover. And she would, if I was close by, she'd stop moving her feet. And she'd wait for me to go by. And she knew that I had to go back to the truck to get my receiver. But definitely they learned. Some of them are really smart.
Yeah, this is from the home on test. Question from my daughter, actually, what is your favorite raptor to work?
At a falconry, my favorite raptor to work with are owls. Their life history strategy really isn't suited well for the majority of falconers. They're very just sit on a perch, silently wait for something to come by, and then go for it. But within falconry, so far, my favorite species to work with has been American kestrels. They are a blast. Yes. So the question was, in the wild, how do certain species interact with each other? One of my biggest fears when I am out flying Petrie, a small falcon and American kestrel, is a Cooper's hawk coming in and eating him. So they definitely have their size dynamics. The bigger ones will go for the smaller ones. But normally they're a bit separated out by their life history strategy. So a lot of, say you're flying a goshawk, you're going to be hunting deeper in the woods versus with an hunting areas don't overlap as much. That's a way that they can naturally keep some distance in the wild, but yeah.
I was curious to learn more about your time commitment, your education for continuing to learn about the birds, and like what kind of cost is involved once you make the commitment to falconry.
Question. The question is a time commitment to become a falconer. It's a lot of time, especially in the first 2 years. We are going out, you're going out with your sponsor or another falconer and you're trapping a bird out of the wild. Then you're spending at least a couple hours a day training that bird. And then once that bird is trained, you've got to have the time during hunting season, which is September through the end of March, to actually hunt that bird at least 3 times a week to get out there and do it. So exactly. And that's when people ask, hey, I've got 2 little kids. I'd like to become a falconer. Really a hard spot to start doing it is when you've got kids. I do know some falconers that put the kids in backpacks and out they go. But it's time consuming. A lot of us have 9-to-5 jobs, and you go to work in the morning and you're going in the dark and you're getting home in the dark. So you've got to be able to sneak out at lunchtime or have a job that is slightly off so that you've got the time to actually work with that bird. So it takes quite a bit. It is not a hobby, it is a lifestyle.
Oh, did you have more to add, Alex?
Yeah, mention the cost of falconry, and that can really depend on so many different factors. Little Petrie is going to require a smaller amount of housing than a red-tailed hawk. Or BB the falcon. The housing costs can vary greatly. Other costs can also include food that you're buying for them if they're not catching all of their game. And other costs can be the telemetry, which Dawn talked about, which can be radio telemetry, it can be GPS telemetry. There's many options for all of these things. And so the cost can really vary greatly. And throughout the years, as you are adding to your repertoire or making different decisions on gear that you use, you can add to your original collection.
Yes. So the question was, where do we hunt and where do we hunt locally? I'm more located down near Meadville, so I have a couple permissions to hunt on people's property down that way on some open like cornfields that have been harvested for the year and stuff like that. A lot of people tend to try and get properties closer to them, so that way you can actually go out and hawk in a reasonable amount of time. But that's one of the biggest parts as well is finding and securing places that have game and are safe places to run your hawk. I personally don't hunt out at Erie Bluffs just because that's not the best habitat for him and it's a bit of a drive for me. But yeah. Yes. As someone that runs a dog with their bird.
So the question is, what do you do if you're the one, if you have a dog and a bird, what are you doing as the human being? Most of the time when you start with falconry, you don't start with a dog. Alex and I have gone through that with her red tail, that when you first start into falconry, you need to learn what your bird's doing before you throw something absolutely crazy like a dog into the mix. So you're beating the brush. You are covered in Carhartt, something heavy, and you are in the briars with a stick, thrashing around in the brush, beating the brush, trying to get those rabbits to run for the bird. Once you've got the dog in there, a lot of times you are actually helping direct the dog, keeping the dog with the bird, keeping the bird with you. Just you're the ringmaster. You're trying to keep everybody working together because sometimes it all goes pear-shaped.
Yes.
There are books about falconry like H's for Hawk.
Yes, so the question was, are there books about falconry? Yes, there are books about falconry, like H's for Hawk, that are written by falconers. There are books that teach you all about falconry and the history of it. There's a couple books that talk about different ways of different styles of hunting in falconry. It is mainly a written history. Yeah, we have a very small sample of books up here that everyone's welcome to flip through. But that doesn't even begin the amount of books that are out there on falconry. Yes.
My question that you sort of answered it, I think, is you go and hunt 3 days a week, so 4 days a week, are you home with a meal? They eat every day. What's the pattern of hunting versus home cooked meal?
So the question is pattern of hunting compared to home cooked meals. If you are bored, Google frozen mice and see what you get. Okay. I have not yet told the UPS guy exactly what he's delivering to my house. So if I've been hunting, then I will have rabbit cut up and in the freezer to be able to feed out. And it depends on what's going on. If my bird killed something and ate a bunch, she may not eat the next day. And that's what they do in the wild. If a red tail catches a rabbit, she's going to gorge on it. She may not eat for 2 or 3 days after that. Doing what we do in falconry, we're making that a little bit smaller. So we're working with the weight of the bird and how much food to keep them on that weight. So they're getting a meal pretty much every day. They also need to have, people think, oh, it's got to be meat. Yes, but they need the bone, they need the fur or the feather, and they actually need the GI contents to actually keep them healthy, because that's got all the micronutrients that they actually need that's coming from their food. So if you're getting into falconry, my husband luckily is a falconer. My mom got used to the idea of don't open the bottom crisper drawer. And poor Alex, her husband made her get a college freezer and fridge so that the bird's food is not in the same fridge as theirs.
Yes. So, Yeah, so the question was, once the bird is trapped from the wild, do you have to let it go back to the wild? So when you're really as an apprentice, when you're first learning, that decision mostly comes down to your sponsor. Do they want you to release them and then try another bird again in the fall just to get more experience? Every bird is an individual. Alex can tell you more about that between her red-tailed hawk from last fall compared to a red-tailed hawk from this fall. It also depends on if it's a good bird that's hunting a lot of game. You might keep it through the spring, feed it up so it can molt, and then hunt it again the following year. I have a friend who's a falconer who is on her 9th season with their same red-tailed hawk, versus Alex released her first red tail and caught a new one this past fall. So individual as well as sponsor guidance versus
A friend of ours, actually somebody that I met at one of the falconry meets about 20 years ago. Her 30-year-old red tail just passed away. She had had her for 30 years. So it really depends on what you want to do. Some people who work really hard during the summer will trap a bird in the fall, train it, work with it all fall and all winter, and then release it in the spring and do it again the next year. Some people decide, you know what, I really love this bird. We work well as a team and we'll keep them. So it really depends on the person and the bird. Yes.
Based on what you said, what are the average lifespan of these raptors? Like the Kestrel, how long?
Yeah, so the question was about the average lifespan of these birds. So it really depends. American kestrels in the wild, their lifespan is probably pushing only 5 to 8, maybe 10 years in the wild. Red-tailed hawks are also in that about 5 to 10, maybe 15 range. Usually, as a general rule, the bigger the bird, the longer they'll live in the wild, but that's not a hard set rule. Nothing is in nature. Biggest step is getting through that first year of life, like we said. But then in human care, you can usually roughly double an animal's lifespan. Free food, free healthcare, no predators. So you can help them live a lot longer. But I know there was a rehab center I saw with bird banding studies. We're seeing some birds are living a lot longer. Oh, it was Nova Scotia. A 20-year-old wild red-tailed hawk.
He was
Yes. Yes. Yeah, so you always get the odd ones that will outlive that expected lifespan.
I want to control my conduct.
The question is, are we allowed to breed our birds? That is a completely different set of permits. So we are permitted different ways. So, as a falconer, I need a falconry permit. As a bird of prey breeder, I need a permit, a propagation permit. And the nice thing or the bad thing, however you want to look at it, is she wants to be wined and dined before she decides to have eggs with somebody. It's not like a dog or a cat that you put them together and you get eggs out of the deal, or a chicken. She wants to make sure that he's cool before she decides that she's having kids with him. So it takes a bit longer than actually breeding like dogs or cats or rabbits or something like that.
Sell that.
You can sell them to licensed falconers. It has to be a licensed falconer. You can't go out and buy a peregrine falcon. You have to be licensed, whether it's as a breeder or an educator or as a falconer. You need to have a USDA Fish and Wildlife, US Fish and Wildlife permit to be able to do that. We're very regulated. It's all because of the Migratory Bird Act of 1918, something like that. So any bird that is not a hunted bird, you have to have a permit for. So if you found a blue jay on the ground and you raised it up, technically you're illegal because it is a protected species. And all of these birds technically are owned by the US Fish and Wildlife or by all of us, however you want to look at it.
The hour here, so I think that we will end here, but if there are any more questions, I know the three of you will be sticking around here afterwards.
Yeah.
Let's give a big round of applause.
Thank you guys for having us. Oh, good.